Hello.
Everybody's mic's working? Oh, not here. Oh, yeah, there you go. Drew? Yeah, that still sounds like it's working.
Hello.
And even if it isn't, I'm going to go with it. Thanks to everybody for coming out. This is part of our occasional efforts to help provide some knowledge sharing about some of the important policy issues. Wow, that's loud. Facing the state. And one of the important policy issues that the state is facing at the moment is the issue of energy. Anybody who's been paying a fair amount of attention to the price they're paying to fill their tank, the price they're paying to heat their house, the price that they're paying for their electric bill, knows that it's gone up quite a bit over the course of the last year. And we all are dealing with the consequences of that. But one of the challenges is that energy is one of the least understood issues I've found, because it is incredibly complicated. It is incredibly complicated. And what we want to do is sort of help people understand why the prices of energy have gone so high, what are some of the root causes of that, and what are some of the policy prescriptions that are being discussed at the state level to change it. So we've got a great panel here tonight. I'm pretty excited to have them. First, to my immediate left is Representative Michael Vos. He is... That's right. You want to have a good night? Start with the rock star. So Michael is the chairman of the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee. It's funny that we put the science and technology because it should be energy, science, and technology, if we're being honest, but they mostly deal with energy issues facing us here in New Hampshire. Immediately to his left is Representative Doug Thomas from right here in Londonderry. All right, got a few Londonderry people in the room. I'm going to move this forward so I get a little bit further away from the speakers. And he is the vice chairman of the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee. And he too is someone who's a wealth of knowledge on these issues. And as we talk about it tonight, you'll understand just how some of these issues are very complex and how it takes. I would say, I was talking with a freshman saying, you know what, if you're in science and tech, you probably shouldn't try to file a bill to your second term because you probably won't know what you're talking about until the second term. It's because the issues are that complicated. And immediately to his left is Drew Klein. Drew is the president of the Josiah Bartlett Center for Public Policy, New Hampshire's free market think tank. Got that one right. He also is the host of New Hampshire Morning Update on WFEA from 6 to 9. Plug. And by the way, Drew is always looking for good guests. So if you feel like you can come on the show and not throw up on yourself when you're in an interview, reach out to Drew. Get his. He said he didn't have any cards, so don't get his card. Give him your card, and he'll call you and ask you to come on the show. So at 6 to 9 a.m. WFEA.
You just have to be better than Greg, which is a low bar.
No, it's easy. I was on this morning. He keeps bringing me back. I don't understand this. So I'm pretty happy to have these guests. We're going to have this as more of a conversational discussion. We're not going to have it's not going to be too formal or too structured. I might ask one person a question, but if other folks feel like answering it, jump right in. And then we're going to leave plenty of time for any questions and answers. So I think that one of the things we'll start with, like I said, energy has been a big issue for the past year. We've seen massive price increases at the gas pump. We're seeing it in terms of heating and electricity bills. But before we dive into some of the root causes, we should take a little time just to talk about the various energy sectors that we're experiencing. And there are three fundamental sectors in the energy world. So, Michael, can you spend a little time talking about the three energy sectors, sort of how they interact with one another, and what causes some of the jumps in prices for each one of the sectors?
Sure, I'll try my best. Thanks everybody for coming out here tonight. Great to see a big crowd here. So electricity is probably the energy sector that affects us the most because everything we do involves electricity. Look around you right here. There's electricity all around us. And when your power goes out, you know it. You suffer. You can't take a shower. You can't make yourself a cup of tea. You can't do anything without electricity. We've become very dependent on electricity. And of course, there's the heating sector. We heat our homes, we heat our buildings with oil, with gas, and sometimes with electricity. And then there's transportation. That's the other big energy sector. We use a tremendous amount of, we use a tremendous amount of energy for transportation. And you probably frequently hear talk about a carbon tax. A carbon tax at its core is a transportation tax because the fuels that it affects the most are transportation fuels. And transportation fuels are critical to everything we do. All the food we eat, the clothes we wear, all the goods we buy are delivered to us by the transportation sector, either airplanes, trucks, maybe some trains. So those are the big three energy sectors, and we'll talk as the night goes on about what affects each one, I'm sure.
Sure. And Doug, I think a lot of people saw early this summer the big spike in gas prices. And a lot of people started to say, oh, we started to see some of that easing. We were up around $5 a gallon. And that started to ease as we came into the fall. And then all of a sudden we got the double whammy on the heating and the electricity sector. Can you explain a little bit why those were sort of lagging indicators versus the gasoline?
Biden.
That's an easy answer.
No question about it. Spikes this year in electricity. The price of natural gas here in New England is critical to the New England grid because many years ago when natural gas was very, very cheap, many generators went to natural gas, cheap form to produce electricity. And so what happens now is that during the wintertime especially, natural gas is not so plentiful in this area because it has to be shipped in by pipes. And the pipes that we have in New Hampshire are all distribution pipes. They're smaller in diameter, they carry far less volume. And so what happens is that natural gas goes first to heating homes in the wintertime. So all that capacity is bid for early in the year by the power generating plants like the one here in New Londonderry. But when I'm not in Londonderry, but the utilities like Liberty, which services heating for the natural gas, that goes there first. When it comes time to use gas to make electricity in the wintertime, prices are higher because the capacity is less, the demand, the amount is less, and when the power plant here, say in Londonderry, goes to bid for getting natural gas from outside the area, it's a lot more expensive. In fact, about several years ago, there was like a 100-fold increase in just a couple of days. You saw, if you were here back then, several years ago, you saw a big spike. So natural gas is the key here right now. That's driving the price of electricity. Now, when we stop fracking, as somebody mentioned, there's less natural gas. When we start shipping natural gas over to Europe, who needs natural gas because they're not buying it from Russia anymore, they're willing to pay a lot more for that natural gas. That affects the global price of natural gas, which is what we pay for here. So that's another reason why the price is spiked. I can go on, but I don't want to talk forever.
No, that's great. I think that's important to help us, give people a baseline level of understanding. Drew, what we've heard from the Biden administration is that the cause of these price spikes is basically two reasons. First of all, the war in Ukraine and greedy gas station owners and greedy oil and gas companies. How do you assess those statements?
Greed. It's amazing that the Biden administration has the same culprit for gas prices, for oil prices, for airline tickets, for baggage fees, for eggs, right? It's all corporate greed. And it's amazing how, when you look at charts, you can chart corporate greed. Did you know that? Corporate greed corresponds precisely with supply shortages. Like, it's amazing. Supply drops and corporate greed suddenly goes up. Who knew? The fact is, it's just supply and demand. And the Bernies and the Bidens and the Liz Warrens want to blame corporate greed. But can I kind of ignore your question and make a joke?
When did that stop you before?
Okay. So how many people have a beer? Right? So we're at a brewery. Good. If you don't, get one. This is the Joyful Almond. It's amazing. Energy is like beer for a couple of reasons. New Hampshire was a brewery desert for decades, for 58 years. From the end of Prohibition to 1991, we got our first craft brewery. Why? Because breweries were illegal in New Hampshire. Essentially, microbreweries. We had, in 2012, we had 21 breweries in New Hampshire. We have over 90 breweries now. Because we legalized craft breweries, we legalized microbreweries, we legalized nanobreweries. The law created a shortage. It's exactly the same thing with energy. We have a shortage of energy in New England. We have a shortage of supply because people block pipelines. The regulations on nuclear power are so ridiculous that it makes it unaffordable to build a nuclear power plant. It is government getting in the way of entrepreneurs who want to supply you with energy. Entrepreneurs want to sell you energy. Greedy companies want to sell you things at low cost. But government gets in the way and tells them you can't do that. Every one of these taps over here is just like an oil pipeline. You've got a keg, that's the oil in the ground. You've got the pipeline that brings it to you, the consumer. You can get Ecuadorian chocolate and Ecuadorian bananas for a couple of bucks, 39 cents a pound for bananas that come from Ecuador. But we're raising the price of oil and gas from Texas and Pennsylvania because we won't allow states to build a stupid, simple pipeline to bring it from the ground to you. It's all government. That's the reason energy prices are high in New England. It is the only reason energy prices are high in New England.
Thanks, and I'd be remiss after that comment if I didn't throw a shout out to Mark Warden in the back. Mark is the reason who passed the law that you can allow all these microbreweries to exist. So how about some round of applause for Mark? You didn't think he was getting a shout out today. So Michael, conservatives, in response to what the Biden administration said, they've blasted the administration for canceling a number of domestic energy projects like the Keystone Pipeline, drilling in Anwar, and blocking planned offshore drilling. What impact do you feel those moves have had directly on, or would have had on the price increases we've seen over the past year?
Well, Greg, just like Drew said, it's all about supply and demand. We're recovering from the pandemic years. Demand has gone up. Supplies, however, are significantly constrained, not just by a lack of pipelines, although that's a big one, but because there's an active war going on by the Biden administration against fossil fuels. They're passing policies that discourage oil and gas companies from raising capital to find more oil and gas and get it out of the ground and then get it to customers. If it becomes difficult for you to get a bank loan to build a pipeline, you're not going to build a pipeline. And if there's no pipeline, you're not going to get the gas or the oil to the people who need it. So the Biden administration and Democrats in general have started a war against fossil fuels. It's been ongoing now for a good 20 years. They claim that renewable energy will take its place. But renewable energy, as Vaclav Smil indicated about 5 years ago, renewable energy is the first energy revolution in the history of mankind where we've gone backwards from a source of energy that produces a lot of energy cheaply to a source of energy that produces less energy, but it's more expensive. We're actually going backwards with renewable energy. Now, I'm not against renewable energy, but it is expensive. And if people want to pay for it, I'm all for them using their money to pay for it. What I don't like is when they want to use my money to pay for their renewable energy.
And Doug, one of the other challenges that we're facing in the electricity space is a decline in supply. The number of megawatts that have been retired in New England has been substantial. Just about a decade or so ago, we had 5 nuclear plants across New England. Now we have 2. Can you talk a little bit about how, by shutting down some reliable, safe generating stations, New England has put itself at risk of potentially things like rolling blackouts? I know the ISO New England has mentioned the prospect of that. Can you talk a little bit about how that impacts the energy situation in the region?
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right. In fact, it was a little over a year ago where, at my own peril, I briefed my town on the ISO New England's warning to the utilities, and they told the utilities that they had to develop a plan for rolling blackouts that were most likely to happen within the next few years. So I brought them to my town council meeting. I had Eversource, that's our current supplier here, and they talked about their plan. And you know, the first question was, what are you going to do about it? And I very politely and tactfully said that, well, voters in the past put certain people in office. And they started to get rid of the fossil fuels that we had, the plants, by, in some cases, economically squeezing them out. And so, before this big rush to renewables, we had nuclear power plants, we had oil and gas. Now, granted, oil and coal, you know, are dirty, and they do have scrubbers, but it doesn't take care of everything. So, using them less and less is not a bad thing. But natural gas is the cleanest of all fossil fuels. So, and by far, nuclear energy gives 0 CO2 emissions. But they were expensive to build because of all of the regulations. As policies were in favor of renewables getting more money, and the system of pricing is so complex, I just won't explain it here, but envision a bidding system where the renewables didn't have to bid. They just took the highest price at the time. And the prices would get higher and higher, or lower and lower as the ceiling got lower with renewable energy. A lot of plants, like some of the nuclear power plants, just couldn't compete anymore. So they decided it was economically not to their benefit to go on, so they shut down. Because they shut down, we lose a lot of what we call baseline power, which means those nuclear plants, they run 24/7. They're 98% running all the time, and they're there for you. Turn that switch on, that power is there. Solar and wind are not, you know. And I know the other side doesn't like this when we said it, even when we said today. They don't like it when we say that the sun doesn't shine, solar doesn't work, and the wind doesn't blow, the windmills don't work. They don't like when we say that, you know, but it's true. So that means they're not reliable 24/7. So as we're shutting down more and more of these reliable plants and bringing on more of these renewables, ISO New England said, look, we see in the immediate future that we're losing more of these reliable baseload plants, and what we see coming online are more renewables which are not reliable. We are sending out warnings that there may be a time when we can't meet our peak load, and because renewables can't generate and we don't have enough dispatchable or reliable fuels, they send us warning out saying we could have rolling blackouts because we don't have enough power to generate when we need it, because it could be a cloudy day, very cold day. We have more solar panels out there. They're not generating what we need, and there's not enough dispatchable plants out there like gas and nuclear, and that's why we have the situation right now. During this period of time, what they're telling us is we are in danger of not having enough power to meet when we need it the most because of the situation we're in. That's the simplest way I can explain it.
Absolutely. I think people might not understand that New Hampshire itself is not necessarily doing so poorly. New Hampshire makes at least 130% of the electricity that it in its demand, and sometimes it's substantially higher. But what people might not realize is that 55% of the electricity in New Hampshire comes from one plant, the Seabrook nuclear plant out on the seacoast. And I think that it demonstrates just how responsible and committed to baseline generation nuclear was, and to lose 60% of the nuclear plants in the state is obviously a problematic scenario. Drew, New Hampshire has among the highest electricity costs in the nation, and while we're very competitive in a number of areas nationally, our high electricity cost presents a competitive liability for the New Hampshire advantage. I know you're in touch with a number of business owners. Can you share with the folks here some of what you've heard about electricity prices specifically and energy prices generally, and how they're making New Hampshire a less attractive place to start or grow a business?
Sure. Well, if you're a business owner, whether you're an executive at a major corporation or a small business owner, you look at all of your costs. Right? You have to have a balance sheet and a spreadsheet. And you look at all the inputs, so your labor costs, your supplies, everything. Energy is a massive part of your cost. So when we pass laws and regulations that limit the supply of energy that then raise the price, or we pass green energy mandates that raise the price, anything that drives up the price of energy raises your cost on that balance sheet. So same thing with wages. So if you pass a minimum wage law, you raise that floor of the wage, that's going to drive up that part of your balance sheet. So we've actually had some manufacturers, some fairly large businesses in New Hampshire make the calculation. They're smart. They have accountants. They go through their spreadsheets and they go, our energy cost is a larger and larger portion of our percentage of our bottom line. And then they just look around. Well, they do the same thing with labor. So people get upset that we lose manufacturers to South Carolina or Alabama because the labor costs are so much lower there, or Mexico. But we lose occasionally, we will lose businesses to other states for the same reason, but with energy being such a high cost. Because when you do all of the calculations, New Hampshire has high labor costs. Now we're highly productive. New Hampshire employees are very productive, which is why we still have manufacturing here. You pay for it, but you get a huge benefit out of it. But there comes a point, if your other costs go up too high, you're going to do the math and you're going to go, you know what? I can increase my profit margins quite a bit if I relocate. And so we've seen a couple of employers do that. And the higher the government pushes those costs, the more you're going to drive more people away. But also, businesses that might move here are also doing that math. So we don't know how many businesses have done the math and decided, nah, I'm not going to northern New England. Why would I do that? My energy costs are way too high. So it costs us a lot.
And Michael, we talk a lot about these how New Hampshire and New England have some of the highest electricity costs in the country. But one of the challenges we face at a state policy level is that many of the issues that drive these costs have national market forces and impact our regional infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamics of just how much control we have at a state level over this policy and how much is driven by national forces?
Yeah, sadly, we don't have a lot of control over what our energy costs are. Obviously, we don't produce any oil in New Hampshire. We don't produce any gas in New Hampshire. We have to get those commodities from other states. And the price of those commodities is what it is. We have to pay it. And getting it here, because we're at the end of the pipeline, means that we're going to probably end up paying a little bit more for it. The only thing that we can control here in New Hampshire is public policy. Public policy are those policies where we say, okay, we want to support renewable energy. We want to support energy efficiency. We want to make it easier for people who have solar panels to put power back on the grid. So we pass policies that essentially add taxes to our electricity bills to pay for those policies. Right now in New Hampshire, if you're an average electricity customer, you're paying about $10 a month for these policies. Energy efficiency costs you about $4 a month. Renewable energy costs you another $4 a month. And net metering costs you another $1 or $1.50 a month. So you're paying $10 a month to support government policy. We try, and we have been relatively successful, to keep those costs at as low as possible. Unfortunately, you can't do away with those policies because, like any government policy, once it's been in place for a while, it develops a constituency. And if you try to take away their rice bowl, as I've heard one of my colleagues describe it, they scream bloody murder. And it becomes politically impossible to do away with those policies. But in New Hampshire, we spend less on energy efficiency. We spend less supporting renewable energy than the states around us. Now, our Democratic friends call what we do a donut hole. They say that New Hampshire is way behind the other states. I say New Hampshire is way ahead of the other states in being reasonable and realistic about how we spend our energy dollars.
Hey, Michael, can I ask you a question?
Massachusetts. Who's a
Yeah,
moderator?
I just got to follow up with this. Massachusetts has close to the same electricity rates we have, but a much more robust energy efficiency program. They spend masses of money on energy efficiency, yet their electricity rates are about the same. What does that tell you?
That tells you that energy efficiency, while a reasonable thing to do, all of us should be using resources efficiently if we can, is not the panacea. There's a well-known phenomenon called Devon's paradox, which says that the more efficiently you make something, the more people use of it, not less. They use more of it. Plastic is a great example. 50 years ago, we used very little plastic, but in the 50 years that have passed since, we learned how to make plastic more efficiently, cheaper, and now we're surrounded by plastic. We live in a world that's awash in plastic. Why? Because it's cheap and it works. It does what we want it to do. That's what efficiency does to an economy. So energy efficiency, to your point, actually may be causing us to use more energy, not less.
But Doug, as it relates to electricity, we have a problem that we are attached to a grid with neighbors who have really expensive habits. The other New England states have engaged in policies that don't put consumer energy prices first, but instead focus on achieving other policy goals. How do you assess the trade-offs they've made, our neighbors, the other New England states, and how it's impacting consumers, particularly low and fixed income consumers?
Well, you have to understand the grid. You have to understand the grid. All 6 states are attached to this highway of electrons, so that in northern New Hampshire, you're on the same grid as they are down in Stamford, Connecticut. And so, when states have policies, and it's kind of hard to explain with the grid, it's just so complicated. But I'll think of, for instance, if you are in real energy hogs, say in Massachusetts, where they need a lot of energy for a lot of industries, and they need more power and more transmissions, right? More transmission lines, which are the high power lines, have to be built. When they're built, the cost of that, for reliability purposes, for the grid, is shared amongst all the states. So we all share in the cost of what maybe Massachusetts has to have to build. That's reliability. It's reliability for the grid, but we need more because they've got more. There are more, larger cities down there, more people, and so forth. That's one way that we share in the cost, and it affects our consumers here because we pay a lot for that. Now, can you be a little more specific on other items I talked about?
Sure. So, for example, the policies in places like Vermont, Maine, and Massachusetts encouraged those states to move to decommissioning of their 3 nuclear plants, as well as another of the nuclear plants, and to build out an expectation through regulatory policy that favors a lot of other renewables instead, and the impact that has on pricing across the board for everyone in the region.
Well, I'm not that familiar with Vermont or policies like that, but I do know that when you do decommission a nuclear power plant, again, like I said before, you are losing not only a base load power plant, but an efficient power plant. Now, they're building lots of solar energy, and I guess some wind projects as well. Those are expensive to build. But here in New Hampshire, people have to understand, if we generate power here, we don't keep it here. It goes to the grid. And so what happens is they can sell this power in the form of RECs or TIMs. And so if it's more economic, if they can sell it more, people in Mass pay more. The power we sell from here goes to Massachusetts. All right. Anything other than that, I'm going to have to defer to my chair here because he is the absolute expert when it comes to that particular part. He lives and breathes all about those programs. I'll defer my time to you just to finish that up.
Sure, Michael, go ahead.
Well, I already touched a little bit about how the various policies are adding to our electricity bill. But Drew says it best almost every week. When government sticks its finger in the pie gets sour, and you don't want to eat it. Government is the problem. If we would let markets do what markets do, we would have cheaper energy, we would have abundant energy, but as long as government has its thumb on the scale, it's always going to be expensive, and there's always going to be a supply-demand imbalance. Am I right about that, Drew?
I'd like to add one thing to that too, just as an example for net metering. We have our power plants here are like Eversource. They buy from the wholesale market. They probably pay 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour. But because of net metering and state policies have said, hey, if you're generating power from your rooftop and you have excess power and you want to put it back to the grid, it mandates that the electric company has to buy it back from them. However, they don't buy it back for 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour. They buy it back for what the state says. We think because of the advantage of not having to build another power plant, because you're not putting emissions into the air. It's all worth something. So therefore, we believe that you can sell it back to the power company. I think right now it's running about 12 cents a kilowatt hour. At 12 cents a kilowatt hour, that the power plant or that the electricity company is paying for is passed on as the cost of doing business, right? And when it comes time for rate hikes, they include that into the cost of doing business. Another example of government getting in the way and mandating, in a sense, price fixing, in a sense. That's one of the biggest problems here. I'd like to add, though, while I'm here, we have 2 of our committee chairmen sitting over here in our Science and Tech committee, and we recruited Oh, three. I'm sorry. Sorry, Janine. I didn't see you over there. I did say guys, though. I did say guys, though. Three. We recruited these people, the best and brightest that understand what's going on, and they are part of this team that we have, helping to keep your prices down and helping to keep the other side from demanding more.
Drew, one of the things about the energy marketplace, and that it is so heavily regulated, is that it is probably one of the areas in government, and particularly state government, that is most ripe for people picking winners and losers. Can you talk about the impact from a market standpoint of picking winners and losers the way we do, so just bold-faced, in such a bold-faced manner, and say, oh no, we're going to pick that person's and whatever, and you're a loser.
Well, Doug mentioned net metering, which is a great example of picking winners and losers, but I'll give you a couple more. So government gets involved in energy markets because it doesn't think you're going to make good choices. Government gets involved to say, we think you would be better off if you chose this source of energy, wind, solar, hydro, whatever. So we're going to rig the market. So we're going to subsidize these energy sources that we prefer. Now, this is not to be against those energy sources. I'm a free market guy. I'm going to make a beer metaphor again. This is the Joyful Almond. It is delicious. I like this beer.
That's another plug.
I'm going to keep making that plug, by the way. Because I, as a free market guy, I want this beer to be available for me next year, so if you buy more of it, I might have it next year. So look at this list. There's like 4 IPAs on this list. And the reason is because Chris Maven is a hippie. And he didn't even hear me. And he likes IPAs. I don't like IPAs. Now imagine I'm the government. And I'm going to say, you know what? I don't want you to have IPAs because IPAs are not the best. And the best are porters. Or whatever I prefer. So I'm going to make IPAs more expensive and porters, or whatever I prefer, less expensive. And that's kind of what the government's been doing to the energy market, is rigging these prices, rigging the system. And then in the cases of some states, and Vermont's a great example, taking an option off the market. I would prefer an energy market that looks more like that board there. If you like IPAs, knock yourself out. If you like pale ales, ambers, whatever, I don't care. The market should supply you with the source of energy that you prefer, that makes you feel good about yourself. The point is we should all have options, and the government shouldn't get in the way of the suppliers supplying you with those options. Vermont, in their infinite hippie wisdom, decided to close the Vermont Yankee power plant because nuclear was bad. We didn't want nuclear plants anymore. So they shut down the Vermont Yankee plant. Instead of trying to fix it, they shut it down. It is now closed. What happened to greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont the year after the Vermont Yankee plant shut down? They went up. Because what replaced clean burning nuclear? Natural gas and coal and oil. New Hampshire has one plant that burns coal. We only use it a few days a year. We only use the coal a few days a year. We used coal during the recent cold snap. New Hampshire burns less than 1% of energy from coal. During that cold snap that we just had, it went up to 2%. More than doubled the amount of coal we burn. Why? Because every time they tried to build a natural gas pipeline to that plant that burns coal, the Greens said no. The Greens said, we don't want to burn natural gas. Natural gas is bad and dirty. We want renewables. But renewables don't power the state when it's negative 10 degrees. Fossil fuels do. Don't have a natural gas pipeline to that plant because they won't let us build one. But we do have coal that comes on trains, so we doubled our coal emissions. Thanks, environmentalists. That's how it works.
So this is a question for all of you. If you were to look into your crystal ball and see what the energy future looks like maybe 25 or 30 years from now, where do you think we'd be in 25 or 30 years?
Well, gosh, I hope that we have small nuclear reactors all over the place. That's what I hope. And even if that does come to fruition, we'll still be using natural gas. The United States by itself has a 300-year supply of natural gas, and that's just what we know about. The Marcellus shale field in Pennsylvania and New York, some scientists believe that there is an equal amount of gas to what we know about in that field underneath that field that we just haven't discovered yet. So there is plenty of natural gas out there to last us for hundreds of years. Nevertheless, small nuclear reactors will probably be the wave of the future. If you can put a 50 or 100 megawatt small reactor in every county in New Hampshire, you can generate all the power you want. You can power electric cars, you can power heat pumps, you can do whatever you want. So that's what I hope will be the future.
Doug?
Well, you stole my thunder because small-scale nuclear really is the wave of the future. In fact, last year I helped sponsor a bill that was put forth by one of our reps to start a commission to explore the aspects and the feasibility of small-scale nuclear power in the state of New Hampshire. I also sit on a National Legislation Committee for Energy, where we get briefings on small-scale nuclear. There's a lot of different technologies out there now involving small-scale nuclear. But I truly believe that is the wave. It's not very hard to put where we currently have our coal power plant now. Small-scale nuclear can fit in that footprint and use the same infrastructure. The biggest problem I think we have right now is Hollywood and the greenies. I mean, we need to start changing people's perception of the old Hollywood style of bad nuclear. And that was one of the things that I put forth on this commission when I first attended. I said, you have to start with ways on how you can start putting good PR out there and telling people that small-scale nuclear is a wave of the future, is safe, it's cheaper, and you can put it almost anywhere. I do know that the Air Force is buying one for up in Alaska, and there's a pilot plant in Utah going on right now to test out one of the technologies. We're being told that 5, maybe 10 years away, you might see some somewhere start up. New Hampshire doesn't have natural resources in that respect. Small-scale nuclear, I believe, is what we really need to go gravitating towards. Of course, we're always going to have renewables as well. We can't have 100% of either. It's got to be a mixture, has to be a balance, but small-scale nuclear would serve us very well.
Yeah, I'm a free market guy. My dream for an energy future is one where each person, each family, each neighborhood, each town can pick its own energy source. If you want to have small-scale nuclear, and small-scale nuclear is absolutely the way of the future if we get the regulations right and allow it to work. National Geographic had a story. And these guys they're Greens. They're really left. But in the 90s, National Geographic had a big story on how you could have the technology then they thought was not far off, that you could have neighborhood nuclear power plants. You could have a little tiny, like that barrel, nuclear plant in every neighborhood. And you wouldn't need these massive grids. Like, imagine that. But heat pumps. So it's not just nuclear, right? So you can have nuclear, you can have heat pumps, you can heat your house. I would love the solar technology to get to the point where it's more efficient and more powerful. So the key to the future for energy is innovation. It's just innovation. It's investment, it's technology advancement, it's innovation. That's always been the key. And I guess I'm going to leave you with this thought. We just went through this horrible winter spell. It's a great winter, it's super warm, but we had that one spell where people were worrying about people dying on the streets and all that. And just to think about innovation and technology. We're in New England, we're in northern New England. People have lived here for hundreds of years. For all of human history, the number one concern for surviving a year in New England has been, how do we get through the winter? How do we keep ourselves warm in the winter? Built fires, did all kinds of things, tried to get the technology going. And within the last century, we solved that problem. Innovation, technology, capitalism, solved that problem. We have the technology to keep every person in New England alive during the winter, every winter, forever. And yet, every winter, ISO New England says we're in danger of rolling blackouts. We might not have enough power to get through this cold snap. It's not because of technology. We have the technology. We have the money. We have the capability to keep every person alive in New England throughout the winter, every person warm and snug. The only